I will simply complete what we have started. Then we'll come back to questions. So there is still one more topic which we have to consider, and that is what is a religious mind. So in 1984, in one of the small group discussions at Rajghat, Varanasi, Krishnaji entered the discussion room with a piece of paper in his hand. Usually Krishnaji never carried any notes for any of his discussions or any of his talks. But on that day, he carried a small piece of paper on which he had jotted down certain points. And he took his seat. We were all sitting on the floor, on the carpet. And he started reading from that piece of paper. So he had listed the qualities or the properties of a religious mind. And this discussion was about what makes the place religious. So that was the theme of this discussion, that what makes the place religious. And during that discussion, Krishnaji began the discussion by reading those qualities or properties of a religious brain. And so he said that a religious brain has no shelter. It is not scattered. It is unshackled. So these are the words he used to describe the properties of a religious mind. It is unshackled. It has no schedule. It is non-comparative. It is utterly free from ritual, dogma, and faith. That means these things have no place in the religious brain. Then it is non-comparative. And then, so this much he had noted down. And the last one he added at the last moment by saying that it is that quality of love and compassion which has intelligence. So these are the things which he listed as the qualities of a religious mind. What is a religious mind? So all these properties, they actually indicate that it is not a mechanically functioning brain. It is a creative mind. So creative mind is not predictable. Then he went on explaining each of those qualities. He says that a religious brain has no shelter. So what do we mean by shelter? So shelter is a kind of location, a kind of thing where you feel yourself as safe. So we take shelter at home. So at home, we feel safe. We feel that we are safe. So shelter is a location, a place, or a position, or a stand taken by the brain so that it feels itself as safe, secured. So if a brain has taken any kind of shelter in anything, then it is not a religious brain. Usually we take shelter in all kinds of beliefs. We take shelter even in illusions, because by taking shelter like that, we feel psychologically secured. So a brain which is seeking psychological security is not a religious brain. It is a limited, conditioned brain, happily living in its own shelter. Therefore, it is not open to the life as a whole. It is enclosed in that shelter. So such a brain is not religious at all. So he said that a religious brain has no shelter, which means it is not seeking any psychological security. It doesn't need any shelter. Then he says it is not scattered. Now our brains are mostly scattered because all kinds of thoughts, they keep on moving in it. We are not focused on anything. Therefore, we don't understand anything. And the thoughts simply, they keep on taking our hold and again leaving us, and again taking hold and again leaving us. So we are not able to think consistently about anything. So the moment we start thinking about something, something else comes up, then we start thinking about that, and then again something else comes up. And so the whole brain is scattered all over. And therefore, it is unable to explore anything, because it is not able to focus its energies on something which it wants to understand. So it is scattered all over the place. And such a brain is not a religious brain. Then he says that it is unshackled. Shackled means bound, tethered, attached. So if the brain is attached to anything, it could be an idea, it could be a person, it could be anything, then it is not a religious brain, because that attachment will limit the function and the scope of that brain. Then everything will be understood or interpreted in terms of that attachment. So such a brain is not capable of seeing things as they are. Therefore, it is not a religious brain at all. So a religious brain has no attachment to anything. Then he says that it has no schedule. Usually our brains are habituated to function in some kind of schedule. So we plan our days. Not only that, the physical schedule is understandable, but psychologically also we have some kind of schedule, because we are always trying to become something. We are always trying to become better and better. We are always trying to achieve something psychologically. And so such a brain then has its own schedule. So it says that, okay, day by day, I'm becoming more and more like this. And then it lives in that schedule. So a brain which is busy in becoming something is not a free brain. Therefore, it is not in a position to inquire. Such a brain cannot inquire into anything because it is caught up in its own schedule. Then he says that the religious brain is non-comparative. Now, about psychological comparison, Krishnaji has talked a lot. We have also explored that point in the previous workshops many times. Whether it is possible to live one's life without comparing oneself psychologically with the other person, the other things, or compare psychologically with oneself. So if a brain is always comparing itself psychologically with others or with itself, in the sense that it is always trying to become something, then such a brain is incapable of any religious inquiry. Therefore, it cannot be called as a religious brain. So it is non-comparative. Then he says that such a brain is utterly free from all ritual, all dogma, all faith. That means none of these three have any place in the religious brain. Because dependence on ritual only indicates the immaturity of the brain. So we are not saying that you shouldn't perform rituals. What we are saying is that a brain which needs rituals for whatever reason is not yet sufficiently grown brain. Because even in traditional view, they say that every sadhaka has to come to a point where he should have gone beyond the need of any rituals. So that point has to come. So that is even in the traditional setup. And here Krishnaji is saying that a religious brain is utterly free from any ritual. It doesn't need any ritual. It has already gone beyond the need of any ritual. There is no place for faith, because faith is required only when you are unable to see things clearly. Therefore, you believe in them. But when you see something very, very clearly, you don't have to believe it. You don't need belief or faith in that case, because you are able to see it. And therefore, you are able to directly deal with it. There is no need for faith. So faith is only for those who are unable to see clearly and who need some kind of criterion to work, to function, to act. Therefore, they sometimes choose faith. So faith could be misplaced, because you may consider somebody as a realized person and put all your faith in him, and yet that person may not be realized at all. So you have misplaced your faith, and then such a person can exploit you. So a religious brain, there is no place for faith in it. It doesn't have any superstition. It doesn't believe in any kind of established ideas and traditions. Everything is examined. everything is understood and then responded to. So it is totally free from these things. They have no place in the religious brain. And then he says that a religious brain is wholly free in its own independence. So it is not freedom from something. If it is freedom from something, then it is a relative freedom. And so it is not absolute freedom, because you are only free from that particular thing. But still there may be many more bondages which you are not aware of at all. So wholly free in its own independence means it is completely free, not free from something, but the freedom per se. In itself, it has that sense of freedom. And from that sense of freedom, it acts. So the complete understanding, a holistic action is possible only when the brain is completely free. So that is one of the qualities of a religious brain, that it is only free in its own intelligence, in its own independence. And then in the end, he adds that it is that quality of love and compassion which has intelligence. So a religious brain has the quality of love and compassion. It is a compassionate brain. It is an intelligent brain. Usually love is considered in the usual sense as blind. But it is not love which is blind, it is the attachment which is blind. And when attachment is mistaken as love, then that love, which is actually an attachment, is naturally blind. As when a person is attached to something, then he is blinded by that something. So he is unable to look at other things in an objective way. He will be always looking at things through that attachment. And therefore, an attached brain is not an intelligent brain, because it is unable to understand anything. While here he is saying that a religious brain is an intelligent brain. So here he is talking about love, which is not an attachment, which is completely different quality, a different dimension. And a religious brain is essentially a compassionate brain. And therefore, it is an intelligent brain. So that is how he explained what he meant by a religious brain. And then the discussion moved further. And then elsewhere also, whenever he has talked about the religious brain, so he has talked about a religious mind versus the scientific mind. This is an interesting comparison, although we said that a religious brain is non-comparative. But then, what is a scientific brain and what is a religious brain? Now, scientific brain doesn't accept any authority. A scientific mind doesn't accept any authority. All its understanding is based on observation, experimentation. and it is very accurate and precise in its observations. So Krishnaji says that all these qualities are also there in the religious mind. So the religious mind is not a gullible kind of mind which just accepts anything, whatever is presented to it. It's not a gullible mind, but it is a mind which is fully awake, which is capable of looking at things directly and objectively. So it is precise and accurate in its observation. It also doesn't accept any authority. So things are not accepted on the basis of who has said those things, but they are accepted only on the basis of direct verification, direct observation. So he says that a religious mind is always scientific, but a scientific mind may not be religious. So then what is that additional quality which a religious mind has, which a scientific mind doesn't have? So the scientific mind functions always in the field of knowledge. All its understanding, all its conclusions are based on knowledge. And knowledge is always a limited thing. And therefore, the brain, which is scientific brain, that brain is also limited in its understanding. Because there is no end to the process of acquiring knowledge. It will go on endlessly. And the more you come to know, you find that there is still far more to know. And so there can never be a point or time when one can say that now one knows all, everything. And a brain whose understanding is based on knowledge has a limited understanding. So it cannot understand anything which is beyond the field of knowledge. Whatever it understands, it can understand only that which is within that field of knowledge. And even if it tries to understand something which is beyond the field of knowledge, that understanding is still part of the field of knowledge, which means that it hasn't understood that which is beyond the field of knowledge. But in its endeavor to understand that which is beyond the field of knowledge, so in that endeavor, it has merely created another content in the field of knowledge, which it labels as that which is beyond the field of knowledge. And so it is not possible for a scientific brain to explore that realm which is outside the field of knowledge, while a religious brain has no such limitation. It is fully and completely capable of exploring not only within the field of knowledge, but beyond the field of knowledge also. The religious brain is capable of a different kind of understanding, which is not based on knowledge, but which is a perception, a direct seeing the things as they are. While a scientific mind may not be capable of that. It will always analyze, it will always use logic and rationality to draw its conclusions, and then it may design experiments to verify those conclusions. But then the direct perception doesn't seem to be possible for a scientific mind, as it is limited by its own knowledge. And then Krishnaji also said that a religious mind is a mind which is all the time learning, is in a learning mode. So it is constantly learning as a movement. So this is also very interesting. He talks about a religious mind always learning, in the learning mode. And then he says that once it is in that moment of learning, then it finds that there is nothing to learn. So sometimes this bewilders the listener, because he says that the religious mind is always learning, and then he also says that actually there is nothing to learn. In the technological field, there is always something or other to learn, because there the learning is in terms of accumulation of knowledge and information. While here in the psychological realm, the realm which is beyond the field of knowledge, now there the learning is not in terms of accumulation of knowledge. In fact, there, whatever you have learnt about, that thing is finished. So if you are learning about a psychological reaction, then the psychological reaction is over. It has ended. And therefore then there is nothing to learn. But still, learning as a movement goes on. And so learning without having anything to learn about is quite an interesting state of mind. Such a mind is always alert, moving, not fixed, and therefore capable of understanding anything that comes in its way. So it's a highly, you can say, if you are able to talk in terms of the material quality, you can say that such a mind is very fluid. It's not fixed or crystallized. Therefore, it is capable of swift movement. It is always moving. So the mind will not be capable of moving if it is tethered, if it is shackled, if it is scattered, if it has taken a shelter, then it is incapable of moving. Then it is not in a fluid state. Therefore, not capable of learning anything new. Then he has also talked about beauty being part of the religious mind. So religious mind has that sense of beauty. So almost all the qualities which he has described and which are not within the field of thought and knowledge. So all those qualities are essentially the qualities of a religious mind. And the life lived by such a religious mind is a religious life. And the place where such a religious life is lived becomes a religious place. So the place doesn't become religious just by building some temple or church or mosque or any other kind of structure there, which is considered as religious structure. A place doesn't become religious by performing all kinds of rituals, but a place becomes religious when a religious mind lives in that place. So that alone can make the place religious. So in that sense, we can say that the places wherever Krishnaji lived, they have become the religious places because a religious mind had lived there. So I think we have almost completed whatever we had planned as our exploration into what is a religious life and what is a religious mind. So now we'll take up the remaining questions, and then any more questions you may like to ask.
There is a saying, work is worship. In the light of today's talk, would work done without involving psychological content and just awareness, there would be no expenditure of energy, and there is sheer joy of doing work, no matter how trivial. Does that tantamount to religious life Krishnaji talks of?
Yes, it amounts to that. But there is no sense of worship there, because any kind of worship involves duality, where the entity to be worshipped is always at the higher level than the level of the worshipper. Therefore, there is a duality. So there is no sense of worship, but there is a joy of doing something, joy of action. And the religious brain is not doing it for the sake of joy. Joy cannot be the goal. But the religious mind is doing it out of understanding, because it is the right thing to do. Therefore, it is doing it. And in doing things in a right way, the joy is inevitable. The joy comes on its own. It's not that the religious mind is seeking that joy, but joy is there. It's a result of that action out of understanding.
Say something.
Yeah, please.
I think whatever we discussed yesterday and today, it seems to be a religious thought and not a thought of any religion. It is a totally different approach of what commonly people know as religion. It is no way related to any religion,
Yes.
Hindu or Muslim or Parsi, whatever it is. It
Yeah.
has nothing to do with that.
That's right.
This religious thought, I think it should be renamed. Then it will be convenient for the people to understand. Otherwise, they consider something that I will know something about the religion, but it is not. It is a different, totally different thinking. Although it is very good and gives lot of information.
Yeah.
Is it right?
Yeah, you are right, but unfortunately, we don't have many different words to use. And even Krishnaji would not have liked to use some of the words which he felt were grossly abused by
Maybe we
people.
can call it a social thought rather, so that
No,
nobody will relate his thoughts to a particular religion.
no, if you use the word social thought, will anybody be interested in understanding what we mean by social thought?
That is also a point, but
Yes.
generally I think that
Yes.
Krishnamurti was talking about and what people are trying to understand, it is only related to the people who have got the ability to think. Otherwise, nobody will go into details or listening to what Krishnamurti is talking about, because they will not understand.
No, I think when you have made it very clear in what sense Krishnaji is using the word religion, then there is no place for confusion. So actually, it is the tradition, it is the people who have hijacked that word religion and given it their own meaning and exploited the people on the basis of that meaning. Now, all that Krishnaji is doing is that he is stripping that word of all the content that has been put there by others, and he is restoring the original meaning of that word. So it's a kind of restoration. Instead of discarding the word and trying to invent another word, and which again may take a long time to establish what he means by that word. All that he's doing is that he's taking the same words, but then stripping them of all their content and giving his own, restoring the original meaning with which those words were used. And then saying that, yes, this is what actually it means, and not all the other funny things that have been talked about. So similarly, the word love is so misused, and yet Krishnaji had no alternative but to use that word. Otherwise, the word love has been used in, the cheapest possible meaning.
So, and the other thing is that yesterday we were talking about that psychological thought or entity, whether it can be a naturally achieved or naturally obtained. असं जर असेल तर त्या बाबतीत आपण विचार केला तर त्याचं उत्तर मला काही नीट समजलं नाही की नैसर्गिकरित्या हे सायकोलॉजिकल माइंड कसं माणसाला घेतं त्याचं काही उत्तर मला मिळालं नाही आपल्या वचनातून.
Okay. No, so what we were saying,
explore more on that.
Yeah. So what we were saying that, I mean, the question was like this: the ego, the center, is it the product of man? That is, man has created that, or whether it is there naturally, or it got produced naturally. So the answer is both. It is natural, and at the same time it is the product which the human beings have created. So it goes like this: the human beings have naturally the ability to think, the thinking capacity. So the thinking capacity is naturally there with human beings. That is part of their composition. It is part of all the potential a human being has. And so the thinking capacity is naturally there. Now human beings have complete freedom as to how they will use that thinking capacity. So nature has not put any restrictions on that. So a man or a human being can think about anything in any way, and in any way he can use that thinking capacity. There is absolutely no restriction or no condition imposed by the nature. That is the total freedom. But then there are laws of nature, and these laws are out of the complete order that exists in nature. Now, whatever the human beings do, all that action is within these laws of nature. And therefore, if he uses his thinking capacity in any way, the use of the thinking capacity is also governed by these laws. And therefore, every use of that thinking capacity has its own consequence. So what the nature has done is that nature says that, well, this is the thinking capacity. You can use it in any way you like, but whatever way you use it, there will be a consequence against every use that you make, and that consequence is inescapable. So human beings have been given the thinking capacity, right? So there is always a possibility that they can use it in the technological field, or they can use it even in the psychological field. There is no restriction. Nature doesn't say that you cannot use it here and you can use it only there. So naturally, there is a great likelihood that the human beings will use this thinking capacity in the psychological realm also, and they have used it. And when that happened, so that gave rise to the formation of this entity which we call as the ego. So the moment the thought entered into the psychological field and started functioning there, started doing things there, it gave rise to an entity which we call as the ego, the self-centeredness. And then everything started moving around that. And so, in a way, we can say that the creation of the ego, the nature has played its role, and the human beings have also played their role. Because if nature had not given that freedom, if nature had said that, no, you cannot use thought in the psychological realm, then there was no possibility of the formation of the ego. But nature has not done that. It has given total freedom. And human beings, not knowing where to use this thinking capacity and where not to use, they are just using it in every possible way. And therefore, when they used it in the psychological realm, that led to the formation of the ego. And then the whole life of the human beings became egocentric. And through that, the human beings acquired a lot of skills, even in the field of technology and all those things. So that center became a kind of focus. And the development of that center and all those things, that became of great importance to human beings. And so out of their self-interest, they developed technology, they used their thinking machinery, they used it for their survival and so on. So everything went on quite nicely up to a point when that ego or that self-centeredness has become a great danger to the very survival of the human race. Because human beings reached such a point where they have tremendously destructive weapons. They have also reached a point where they are almost reached the limits of their brain or their thinking capacity. And so now they have very limited options before them, either to get destroyed by the weapons which they themselves have produced, or to subject themselves to slow deterioration of the brain, because the brain is caught up in all kinds of entertainment. There isn't much work left for the brain, and therefore the brain deteriorating. And so the humanity has come to a stage where unless they do something about this, they are facing a total extinction. And what is to be done? What is to be done is to find out why only these possibilities. What is the cause behind these possibilities? And that cause is the self-centeredness, the primitive nature, psychological nature of human beings. And therefore, if they want to explore a completely different possibility, which is completely different from this kind of extinction, then they have to understand this whole nature and structure and function of this psychological entity, which is called as the ego. And that is where then the place for self-exploration, observation, paying attention, learning without knowledge, without accumulating knowledge, all those things they come. And through that, when the human beings are able to understand and go beyond this psychological entity, right, then only you can say that the humanity has taken a turn for better. Then the possibility of extinction or self-extinction is completely ruled out. So in that sense, we say that all this seems to be a natural phenomenon, a happening which is a natural course of events. So if human beings don't change, then the natural course of event is their extinction. So nature hasn't told human beings that this is what you have to choose. It is only pointing out the consequences. If you go this way, then this is the consequence. If you go that way, that is the consequence. And it is for the human beings to choose. And with this kind of freedom alone, the awakening of intelligence is possible. Because if human beings are all the time told what to choose, what to do, then there is no possibility of awakening of intelligence. Because then they just become followers. And they will always keep on waiting for somebody to tell them what to do, what not to do, and so on. So then they just become the robots, always waiting for the command. So that is not the way the nature functions. The nature is very, very creative. And the awakening of intelligence is a creative action. And therefore, it is for the human beings to decide which course they would like to take. And only then there is a possibility of the awakening of that intelligence. So all this is very interesting to look at.
Okay, thank you, sir. Nicely told or explained. Thanks a lot.
Sir, this is from Mr. Hans related to that previous question on that atheism and things like that.
Yeah.
So it seems that an agnostic attitude may be a way out of belief, admitting that one does not know.
Yes. I mean, when we do say that I really don't know, so saying that I don't know is not a display of one's ignorance, as usually it is taken. But saying that I don't know is also not the acknowledgement of my inability to know. But saying that I don't know, which means that I have put aside all my knowledge about that thing, which I want to understand. And therefore, my brain is free, completely free. It is not carrying any burden of the knowledge. And therefore, such a free brain then is capable of inquiring and investigating. So if I want to understand God, or if I want to understand what Krishnaji calls as the sacred, then I must have a brain which is completely free from knowledge. Now, a brain which is loaded with all kinds of ideas, concepts, and knowledge about what it wants to explore. That means it has all kinds of ideas about the God, all kinds of concepts, right? Then it will not be able to investigate freely. It will only investigate through those concepts, through those ideas. So every time it sees something, it will try to interpret it in terms of those ideas, those concepts. So which means that it is actually not exploring God, but it is only exploring its own ideas and concepts about God. And therefore, such an exploration is completely futile. It is not leading the inquirer anywhere. The inquirer is very much within the field of knowledge. Its inquiry is also very much within the field of knowledge. And whatever understanding he arrives at through this kind of inquiry is again within the field of knowledge. And so nothing has changed. And therefore, such an inquiry is no inquiry at all. But when the brain is capable of saying that I really don't know, so by saying that, it has put aside all the knowledge it has acquired or come upon. And therefore, it is fresh. It is not carrying any burden. And therefore, then it is capable of exploring something which it had not explored before. So, I don't know is the correct way of entering into this inquiry. It's not possible for everybody to say really I don't know, because I may just say I don't know, but it doesn't mean anything, because I haven't put aside all my knowledge. I'm still under the influence of that knowledge. And therefore, when I say I don't know, it doesn't mean anything. So to be able to really put aside all the knowledge and then inquire into something which hasn't been inquired about before, then that is the real inquiry.
Sir, the next question.
Yeah.
Is there a difference between religion and spirituality?
Oh yes, Krishnaji didn't like to use the word spirituality. He didn't like that word. So he mostly continued to use the word religion, religious, religiosity, but he didn't use the word spirituality. So probably the word spirituality has been used very commonly by all the gurus who wanted to differentiate whatever they are saying or they were saying from the established religions. So if they use the word religious, then they may be mistaken as dogmatic and belonging or believing into already established religions. So they use that word spirituality, and they gave their own meaning to that word spirituality. So that's why probably Krishna didn't like to use that word. So he mostly used the word religion and the religiosity. So I don't think we need to differentiate between these two words, because we are not using the word spirituality at all, whatever it may mean. But we are using the word religion and religiosity or religious. And what we mean by that we have already gone into. So we don't have to worry about the word spirituality.
Sir, I have two questions.
Yes,
The first one is like this. What is the role of meditation in all this? Uh, can we say a religious mind is a meditative mind?
yes,
And the second question is, Krishnaji has number of times spoken about ending of sorrow, and
yes,
he maintained when the sorrow ends, that is the beginning of passion.
yes,
And he also said they arise from the same root or something like that. And also, a passion for all is compassion.
yes,
And when that compassion is there, intelligence is there.
yeah,
You discussed a lot about passion in the morning
yeah,
session.
yeah,
Is it the same passion that you are talking about?
yes,
Thank you, sir.
yeah. So the first thing which you said, that a religious mind is basically a meditative mind. So that is right, meditation in the right sense of the word, what Krishnaji has talked about. So a religious mind is a meditative mind. And then the other thing that you have said is also the way Krishnaji has put these things. So a religious mind is basically a compassionate mind. So that passion is not having any direction. Usually we are passionate about something or other. And if that something or other is taken away, then our passion is also gone. Because if you observe actually in our day-to-day life, we do feel passionate about certain things. And yet we are not that much passionate about some other things. So our passion is related to a definite object, a definite thing. And therefore it is not a passion for all or passion for everything. It is a passion for a particular thing. And therefore it is not a compassion. So what Krishnaji is saying is that a religious mind is basically a compassionate mind, which means that it is passionate, not passionate about something, but it is passionate. So whatever it comes in contact with, it meets that with that same passion. And therefore, we say that he is a compassionate being. So if you even look at any life of any saint, you will see that these saints were passionate towards everything, towards everybody. It was not that they had compassion only for some people and had no compassion for others. They were compassionate to not only all human beings, but they were compassionate to all life, any living form. They were compassionate to that living form. So it is not a passion for a particular thing, but the very nature of a religious mind is such that the religious mind is a compassionate mind. It is always compassionate. And therefore, whatever it comes across, it will relate with that with the same compassion. And a mind which is immersed in its own sorrow cannot be a compassionate mind, because a suffering mind cannot be a compassionate mind. It is completely engrossed in its own sorrow, in its own suffering. So Krishnaji says that only when the suffering ends, the passion is possible. Passion comes only after the ending of the suffering. And when that passion is not directed towards a particular thing, then it is compassion. So the ending of sorrow seems to be a prerequisite for the passion. And so if we are suffering as we live our day-to-day life, then it is part of our religious inquiry to find out why we suffer and to end that suffering out of understanding. Then only the passion is possible.
Dr. Kishorji, may I ask?
Thank you, sir.
Yeah. Please go ahead, Anuradhaji. Yeah.
Kishorji, now you are saying that at the end of the sorrow, compassion is possible.
Yes.
So, is this understanding right that at the end of the sorrow there will be joy? Can I understand it in that sense, sir?
No, not so much of joy, because you see, joy also, we have certain idea, certain connotation, certain feel as to what we consider as joy. While it could mean something completely different than what we are considering as joy. So instead of introducing new words, if we just continue to use the words which we have been using and try to understand the deeper connotations of that word, I think that will be much more helpful and accurate than keep on introducing new and new words and then trying to understand them. Then we'll be merely playing with the words. So we are using the word compassion, and what kind of sense that word generates or indicates. If we are able to capture that sense, right, then it's very difficult to say whether that sense is the sense of joy or whether that sense is some different kind of sense, and so on. It's not possible to describe it in different words. So a person may have his own meaning for the word, say, bliss. And he says that, well, in the meditative state, he experienced the bliss. So then if you try to meditate for the sake of experiencing that bliss, then it becomes totally something else. It is no longer a meditation. Then it becomes a pursuit of pleasure. Then the bliss is interpreted as pleasure, something which is worth experiencing, worth having. And therefore, you want to meditate. So then the whole thing takes a completely different turn. So that is not the way to go about this. So we are trying to use as few words as possible so as not to create any kind of confusion. The more words we use, then there is a more possibility of confusion. So when we are using the word compassionate, so what is the quality of a compassionate mind? What exactly does it feel? What does it sense when it says that it is compassionate? And when one does act out of that compassion, and out of that action, somebody's suffering has ended, then what kind of sense or response gets generated into that compassionate person? Now, why do we want to call it as joy or this or that? And therefore limit it by our own concept around those words. So better to use minimum possible words, but try to go with the actual feeling, the actual sense. And that is what is important. So here we have used only 4 or 5 different words. We have used the word religion, religious. We have used the word love, compassion. And those are the few words which we have used, the intelligence, freedom, and so on. And using the minimum number of possible words, we are trying to get at the content which no word is sufficient to describe or explain. So I don't see any point in adding more and more new words and then trying to understand what that word means. If we are able to move with the content, that is good enough.
Thank you, Kishorji. One small thing, sir, because I'm in the teaching field, from what I have been understanding through these workshops, I think when we are trying to educate our children, it is not to give them knowledge, but it is to develop the qualities of awareness, attention, and observation. So we are then equipping them with the real life skills to be able to understand themselves and thus become better human beings. Isn't it that so, sir?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
That's the real education. Yes.
Kishorji, in the next session, can we go into the finding out of truth of life? We went in good detail into gathering of one's energy.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. Because in the morning we said that gathering of energy itself is not very important. But what are you going to do with that energy? And that is where then Krishnaji completed his definition of the word religion. He began by saying that religion means to gather all your energy. And he said that the root meaning of that word religion means that to gather all your energy. But then he made his own addition to that. And then he said that the religion is to gather all your energy to find truth. So that makes the complete definition of that word religion. And so, which means that all that energy is gathered in order to inquire, in order to explore, in order to find out the truth about life. Now, the questioner is saying that we have talked a lot about gathering of energy, but we have not talked about the exploration of the truth. So that actually we talked about when we were exploring what we mean by meditation. So in the last workshop, which was about meditation, so that is where we said that the meditation is to explore, come in contact with the deeper and the subtler layers of existence. That means we know our existence as we live in the physical world. So most of our existence is based on our life in the physical world. But then whether there are other dimensions of existence which are beyond this physical world, which are beyond the realm of thought and knowledge. Now, how one is going to explore those? How to explore that is the function of meditation. And just now we said that a religious mind is basically a meditative mind, which means that it is exploring those deeper and subtler aspects of existence. And therefore, in that sense, can say that the truth about human life. So truth is not fixed. So you can never say that I have arrived at the truth, because there is no end to the exploration. There is no end to the depth of life. And so Krishnaji has said that in your exploration, you come to such a point where the depth and the extension or the expansion, these words, they lose their significance. That means it is futile to talk in terms of those words, because those words become significant only in a limited situation, where there is a limited depth, where there is a limited expanse. Then these words, they become significant or somewhat meaningful. But when there is no limit to the depth, when there is no limit to the expanse, then to talk about depth and to talk about the expanse becomes futile, becomes meaningless. So therefore, you cannot say that you have arrived at the truth, because the moment it is said, then it is like limiting the truth. It is like holding on to something and saying that, yes, this is what it is. But it is not so. So this life of religious inquiry, as we have said that a religious mind is always learning. So learning as a movement. So it is always moving. And as long as it is moving, that's it. There is nothing further to be reached. There is nothing to be achieved in that sense. But then you may say that, isn't it a kind of aimless movement? You just keep on moving. But that thought will come only when you compare the movement at the physical level. It is like a ship in the middle of the sea and aimlessly just moving here and there without any direction. Now, such an aimless movement is a futile movement again. Now, if you are comparing this movement of learning to that kind of movement, then it's not that kind of movement at all. This is a completely different kind of movement. It is not an aimless movement, and yet it is not a movement which has some definite direction. So it's altogether a different dimension. And I think we have to become familiar with that dimension so that we understand things properly, and not we understand them in terms of our dimension. Because right now, without coming upon that dimension, we are trying to understand things from the other dimension in terms of our understanding of this three-dimensional world. And therefore, we are going to face or such problems or such questions. So it's a completely different thing, and not to compare with that.
Can I ask, sir?
Yeah, please.
So you said direct perception.
Yes.
Is equal to intuition?
No, we cannot call it as intuition, because intuition is again based on knowledge and the previous experience. Because something which you have constantly dealt with, you do develop a feel for that thing. So you don't have to then go through the same logical and analytical process in order to find out what is wrong or what is right with that thing. But you intrinsically feel that this may be the wrong, this may be the problem. and it turns out to be right. And then you act based on that and the problem is resolved. So here you have not employed your capability to explore, to logicize and analyze and look at the problem and all these things. But just taking a feel, just looking at something, you intuitively felt that this may be the problem. And then you later on verified, and then it turned out that yes, that was the problem. And then you were able to resolve it. So that is what we call intuition. We are talking to some person and then suddenly we feel something. And then we say, well, this is what it may be, or this is what may happen to that person, or this is what he actually means, although he is pretending as something else. And many times you find that, yes, your intuition was correct. But that is still based on your experience. It's still based on knowledge, because you have gone through those kinds of things in the past, and therefore you have learnt about them. And then that learning doesn't need, again, the same process of reasoning and investigating, but can directly feel it. But perception is something totally different. It is not based on past. It is the capability to see something immediately, which you may not have seen before at all. Something which is completely new is looked at and instantly perceived and understood. So it's quite a different, you can say, kind of faculty. It is a much higher faculty, if we can use the word higher, than the faculty of intuition. And then there is again a difference between intuition and impulse. In intuition, at least there is some understanding based on thought and knowledge. But in impulse, there is no understanding at all. Impulse is completely based on your psychological feeling, your psychological reaction. And because one has been reacting in that particular way psychologically, therefore that becomes his impulse. And so whenever a similar situation comes, immediately there is a corresponding psychological reaction. And then that becomes his impulse. And out of that impulse, if he takes any decision, then he is more likely to be wrong in that decision, because the decision is taken impulsively. It is based on the psychological reaction. While the decision based on intuition is more likely to be right, more likely to be correct, because it is based on understanding. Although that understanding is based on knowledge and experience, yet since it is based on understanding, it is more likely to be correct. While a decision based on impulse is more likely to be incorrect, and therefore may lead to unacceptable consequences. But
Sir means, okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
No. Sir means what you are saying, perception, it is some another dimension actually. So whatever that is, that energy or that something. So people say it as a God actually, or some another energy. You may say
No. It is your own energy. It is not God or
Okay.
something else. See, out of your own enquiry, you have come to that perception. So you are not different from that. So it is
Okay.
not some God or something else. It is you. And therefore, there is no need to bring in any other agency there and say that, yes, it is that and it is so and so. There is no need. It's a perception, and then there is an action. Right? But in that perception, there is no sense that I have perceived. See, so this is very strange. There is no sense of me. There is no sense as a person. And yet, it is not different from you. It is not some other entity. It is not something else. So it's a very strange kind of sense. Completely unlike anything that we are used to in our three-dimensional world.
But sir, suppose initially you refuse to use the systems or methods.
Yes.
Like that. So initially, person may not be completely aware or completely साक्षात्कार त्याला झालेला असं म्हणू शकत नाही. तर त्या केसमध्ये मी मराठीतून बोलू ना, म्हणजे तो
बोला की.
त्या केसमध्ये काही निर्णय सुरुवातीला चुकतील माझे कदाचित. मी इंट्युशनलाच कदाचित हे म्हणेल, परसेप्शन म्हणेल, इम्पल्सलाच कदाचित परसेप्शन म्हणेल. मग त्या केसमध्ये चुका आणि शिका अशा पद्धतीने पुढे जाऊ शकतो.
Yes, correct. So that is what we were saying, that a person who is in learning mode, he is not afraid of making mistakes, because from mistakes he can learn. In fact, there are certain learning which is possible only if you make a mistake. If you don't make a mistake, then you are not able to learn at all. There is an interesting game called Sudoku. I had mentioned about it. So when you want to solve a Sudoku puzzle, right, then making mistake is one of the ways to find out what digit to put there. If you don't make a mistake, then probably you are unable to find out the solution for that puzzle. So you have to make a mistake in order to learn. So therefore, a mind which is in the movement of learning is not afraid of making mistakes. But if a mistake is made, immediately there is a learning out of that mistake. And the flow continues, the flow of learning, the movement of learning, it continues.
And when we start this journey, suppose I have gathered this knowledge, or I can say मी हे सगळं समजून घेतलं आणि मला आता स्टार्ट करायचंय, तर ते इतकी सिस्टमची सवय पडली कोणत्याही गोष्टीमध्ये मेथडची की मी आता कसं स्टार्ट करणार असा सब्जेक्ट होतो. कुठेतरी बस येईल, काहीतरी मेडिटेशन करेल किंवा कुठेतरी वॉकिंग करताना अवेअरनेस मध्ये वॉकिंग करेल किंवा असं काहीतरी, त्याच्यामुळे तो मार्गच मिळत नाही बरं, त्याच्यामुळे सोडून देतो माणूस त्या गोष्टी. तर सुरुवातीला त्या सिस्टम्स वापरायला काही हरकत नाही.
No, you don't have to use the system. What you have to do is, you have to simply start observing. So you are walking on the road. You are walking on the road, but mostly you are engrossed in your own thoughts. So you are not watching around. You are not looking at things. So you have to then look at things. See, whatever you look at may not be of much interest to you, but yet you have to look at it. And when you start looking at things, trying to grasp the details of those things, right, then you will find that the watching becomes very interesting, because you start noticing things which otherwise you had not noticed. And then when you have walked on the road and you have watched the things, right, then you try to recollect what you have watched. And when you try to recollect, you will realize that you have actually not watched. You have missed quite a lot because you are not able to recollect it. And so you have to watch again. So watching itself becomes quite a good exercise, where the brain is opening up its potential. And if you are able to watch rightly, then that watching matures to such an extent that in one glance itself, you are able to notice all the details that you have seen. So that is quite a capacity of the brain, because normally we don't find such capacity in the brain. So it doesn't mean that we are doing it to develop that capacity. But what we are saying is that the watching has its own effects. Watching has its own consequences. And if those consequences are developing additional capacities and faculties of our brain, then it is most welcome. Then again, when you are interacting with others, you can simply also be watchful as to what you are feeling psychologically, what exactly is your state of mind. And when you are interacting with the other person, from what kind of state of mind you are interacting. And you will find that that kind of watching also becomes very interesting, because you are aware of your psychological reaction. You are also aware that that psychological reaction is completely unnecessary in that interaction with that person. And yet you can't do anything about the psychological reaction. And you are interacting. And you also see that if the interaction is based on that psychological reaction, what could be the response of the other person to that kind of interaction? That also you are able to see. And then when you do see the other person responding exactly the way you have seen, then your observation becomes even much more interesting because you are getting immediate proof of the correctness of your observation. And so then observation doesn't become a boring, routine, mechanical kind of affair, but it becomes very interesting, becomes something live. Then you don't need to force yourself to observe, but in fact, you are very eager to observe. So I think one can go about it in this way. So as long as your brain is in the learning mode, that means you are interested in understanding everything that you come upon, right? Then I think that is the right kind of attitude, because then that will help you in paying attention. And then whatever you pay attention to, you can learn about it. You can have some kind of understanding with it. And then you'll be able to deal with it and so on. Then life doesn't become a random, arbitrary thing. So nothing is done in haste. Nothing is done without properly investigating and giving one's thought and energy to it.
Thank you, sir. And today's session, it was a very useful thing I have learned. We waste our energy in different things, psychological conflicts, all these things. मराठी म्हणतात ना, पण त्याला होल भरपूर आहे खालून, त्याच्यामध्ये पाणी टिकत नाही त्याच्यामध्ये.
पाणी
हे
सगळं
मला
गळून
एक
जातं.
सांगायचं, पण मला समजायचं नाही तेव्हा ते. तो काय सांगतो. So that energy can be utilized to your other things like inquiry also, and in technical things also, in which you are finding something or researching something. That also. Still मला एक कालचा जो प्रश्न होता, की thoughts, can we use the thoughts of great personality or tried tested? You said that these thoughts are also from your mind.
Yes.
So you will decide what is important or not important thoughts. But there are some thoughts some persons have given that are tried and tested. Suppose कबीर के दोहे किंवा असं काहीतरी कोणत्या वेळेस आलेले असतात की जे सांगितले ते तसंच झालं, ते तसंच झालं. तुम्ही एक रिपिटेशन म्हणून तुम्हाला सिद्ध झालं की ह्या थॉटचे हे कॉन्सिक्वेन्सेस आहेत आणि याच्याने बऱ्यापैकी तुम्ही तुमच्या लाईफ मध्ये परिवर्तन करू शकता.
Yeah, there is no harm in going through those thoughts or those things and appreciating, if at all one finds some truth in that, then to appreciate that truth. So, well, that is okay. I don't see any harm in that. But then what people do is that they identify themselves with those things and then start promoting it and saying that, yes, Kabir was great. He has said the same thing, what Krishnaji has said. And then they bring all other saints also. And then they say that, yes, everybody is saying the same thing. So, which indicates a utter lack of understanding. Because such persons, they have not understood even one thing properly. See, even to study one person thoroughly and to arrive at some real understanding of what that person is talking about, it takes such a lot of time and energy. One finds it very difficult to study in the same way the other saints and other things also. And when somebody says that, yes, this saint is saying the same thing as this, or somebody says that, yes, Ashtavakra Gita says exactly the same thing what Krishnaji has said, and so on, right? But then the person who is making such statement, he is unable to tell what Ashtavakra Gita says. Right? So then there is no point in making such statements. So that is where I think one is deceiving oneself. But if one is sincerely reading the other person's works also, and if one does see some beauty and some truth in what that person has said, and therefore one appreciates it because of that truth, not because of that person. And then there is no harm in that. Right? But where is the need to compare what this person is saying and what that person is saying, and then mix up the whole thing and have one's own conclusion that everybody is saying the same thing. So
good
that shows
description, sir.
utter lack of understanding of anything.
Everybody is saying truth, and we should take it as the truth. So, sir, last question, small. हे जे तुम्ही आता म्हणतात की ही परसेप्शन काम करतं, इथपर्यंत समजलं ते थोडंसं त्याच्यावर तुम्हाला स्वतःला काम करावं लागेल तरच तुम्हाला ते तो एक्सपिरियन्स येईल. तर मग जे वाक्य आहे स्पिरिच्युअलिटी मध्ये म्हणतात की यू आर नॉट डुअर, तुम्ही जे आहेत मेमरी तुमची, मी हा आहे, मी या जातीचा आहे, मी हे जे मेमरी आहे ते तुम्ही नाही आहे, समथिंग डिफरंट. तर ते हे परसेप्शन आहे का, आय एम नॉट डुअर, भले विदिन मायसेल्फ दॅट एनर्जी इज, बट दॅट एनर्जी इज अनप्रेडिक्टेड, तुम्हाला माहित नाही पुढे त्याच्यातनं काय ऍक्शन्स होणार आहेत, अज्ञात गोष्टीचा प्रवास येतो असं आपण म्हणू शकतो, आणि तेच डुअर आहे असं म्हणू शकतो.
ऍक्च्युअली काय की आय एम नॉट डुअर, is it a conclusion based on thought, or I am not doer is the actual realization? It is an actual realization, it is something completely different. But if it is merely a conclusion, then it is still in the realm of thought. So it doesn't mean much. I may say that yes, but I am not the doer. Or I may say that when that perception happens, then I am not there as a doer, right? But all these statements, they become a kind of conclusion. It is not the actual perception. It is not the actual realization of that fact or of that statement. And therefore, one can make any number of such statements, but they still remain merely as a conclusion, and they don't make any difference to the life of that person. So one may take those statements as some kind of theory, and theory is always subject to modification and always subject to being proven as wrong. And therefore, one cannot give much importance to such theories. So I have seen people talking a lot about the realm beyond thought without having any clue as to what actually it is. So remaining in the realm of thought, talking a great deal about what is beyond the realm of thought without actually coming upon it. So such talk then becomes merely an intellectual talk or a theoretical talk, and may have very, very limited significance or no significance at all.
पण मग एक्सपिरियन्सने जे आपण जाणून घेऊ परसेप्शनने, मग त्याच्यामध्ये आपल्यासाठी नेचरकडनं लिमिटेड किंवा अनलिमिटेड जे काही असणार आहे समजा, ते आपल्याला ऍक्सेप्ट करावं लागणार आहे. म्हणजेच मग आपल्या हातात काहीच नाही का, की मेमरीच्या किंवा आपल्या इंटेलेक्ट, ते इंटेलिजन्स वेगळं आहे, तुम्ही म्हणता परसेप्शन इंटेलिजन्स, आपल्या इंटेलेक्टच्या हातात काहीच नाही का?
No, actually, you see, the whole thing is like this. When you have completely established order in yourself, then you are in complete harmony with the nature, because nature also means total order. And you have also established a total order within yourself. So therefore, you are not different from nature. You are in complete harmony with the nature. And therefore, whatever you do, that action is a natural consequence of that order of nature. And therefore, such an action is not binding upon the actor, because there is no actor as a separate entity. And therefore, the consequences are of general nature. That means they are not towards a particular entity or a particular person. So if you want to speak traditionally, then you can say that that is the real karma yoga, where the action is there, but the consequences of that action are not coming to the source of action. The source of action is the natural order. So in that sense, the individuality is not lost, in the sense when Krishna says individual means indivisible. So in that sense, the individual is very much there. So it's not that he has completely merged with the nature or with the things, you know. So what idea we have is that they say that your existence is like the water in the pot, and when that pot is broken, that water completely mixes with the sea, and therefore there is no separate water as the water in the pot. So which almost indicates that a complete loss of identity, complete loss of individuality. But actually, it is not so. The uniqueness of a human being is very much there. But then there is no division between that and the rest of the nature. So that uniqueness is still part of the totality of that nature. So it's a completely different kind of sense, you can say. It's not a sense of separation as one experiences when the thinker is separate from the thought or the observer is separate from the observed. That is a different kind of sense. It is a divisive sense. But while here, there is no such divisive sense at all. There is no division at all. So there is complete harmony between the natural order and that individual. And yet, the uniqueness of that individual is also very much there. These are the things of different dimension, and if we try to understand them according to our dimension, we are likely to mislead ourselves. So you have to think in terms of the other dimension.
You are saying that you should tune, you can tune with nature.
Yes.
So thank you, sir.
Georgie, I wanted to make one observation.
Yeah.
So I've been trying to summarize what I learned in the workshop, and the more I try to summarize, the more I realize that there's no point because it's all in a different dimension. The moment I try to bring it in and try to use the words and use whatever sense of understanding, I think I lose something. But I do want to just state here that there is a sense that there is a difference. The community where I live, the people I interact with, every this dimension never comes in, and sometimes I find myself. I probably have answered my question, and I'm still exploring that. There's no pressure in my trying to make my kids understand or make the neighbors understand, whatever. There is the passion and the energy first has to start within, and the truth is where I stand here. And once there's so much to be figured out even there. So it's almost like there's a scattering of energy. And when you were responding to Venu and some of the others, that first step is to realize that to take time, or to stop having all these so many preoccupations, and not engage, not get more into preoccupation, and not do other people's work. So I guess once we start there, the journey will unfold on its own, or where that leads is not even our preoccupation. It's just the starting point where the focus has to be.
Yeah, that's right. And also, when you are into this enquiry and working on yourself, then even without deliberately trying to convey it to others, the way of your life, it conveys indirectly to other people. It's not that you want to convey it, but the way you interact with them, the way you think about them, or try to understand their situation and so on. That way itself is an enough indication for those others that you are interacting in a different way. There is something different about you. So you are not interacting with them in the same routine way, with the same kind of ideas and so on. And this noticeable difference itself can encourage them to find out more about this. Or even when you interact with your children out of that inquiring mind, right? Then those children, they also respond to you in a different way. So maybe they open up more in front of you, and they may feel very free to share whatever that is happening to them without any reservation or without any fear of being misunderstood and so on. So I think you don't have to do anything deliberately to communicate your understanding to others, but your way of living based on your inquiry and your understanding of life itself is strong enough to convey that understanding or that different way of life to others with whom you come in contact with. So I think that is the right, and that is the only right way of going about it. But if you start deliberately trying to introduce, then give them books of Krishnaji to read and so on, then sometimes you may become an object of ridicule.
Yeah. And we may lose the our own touch with or my own touch with what it is that was making, because I do feel like there is some order. Going back to some of the stuff that you said, Kishorji, that we first need to put our house in the order, and that does require quite I mean,
it does require quite a lot of work. Yes.
Yeah.
It's not only the physical house, but it is more the psychological house, which is actually in such a total disorder. To create order, it does need a lot of work to be done on oneself. And that work you can do while you are interacting with others, because that is when that disorder becomes visible. So when you are interacting with your children and when you are psychologically reacting to them, then that is when you are in a position to observe that disorder. Sometimes you do get impatient with the children, sometimes you don't disapprove, sometimes you do disapprove of what they are doing or thinking, and so on. So at that time, our psychological nature becomes visible to us. And if we are aware of that, then we can learn quite a lot out of that.
Kishorji, one last point I do want to make. So like Venu was saying about, having this, the energy levels increasing, and then, or I don't know, some of the participants mentioned that energy level increased, and then what I'm finding is that there's definitely been an increase in energy, but more action items or more tasks or more preoccupations have tried to fill it. So there is a sense of being comfortable with that sense of vacuum. There's definitely getting used to or getting familiar with that.
No, not sense of vacuum. I mean, I think that is not the right word, because we have explored that word in the morning. And so it's not a vacuum, but it is an emptiness which is full of energy. Now, what usually happens is that whenever there is a lot of energy available, right, we are somehow unable to hold that energy. We are somehow unable to remain with that energy. And therefore, we always try to do something with that energy. So which means that we again go after fresh occupations, some other activities, and so on, so that that energy is spent. And then we are again back to our normal level of energy. So I think it does take a lot of work and a lot of observation to remain with that high level of energy. And the body also has to get used to that level of energy. Because in Krishnaji's last statement, he had mentioned that you people have no idea as to how much energy functioned through this body. And he compares it with a 12-cylinder engine. So if an energy of 12-cylinder engine tries to function through our bodies will get simply shattered. It just can't withstand that kind of energy. So it does take time for the body to get used to that higher levels of energy. And usually the first response to the higher level of energy is somehow to spend that energy and come back to the normal level of energy. And that makes the person to search for new occupations, new activities, or repeat the old activities again, and somehow spend that energy. And so the person is unable to live with that higher energy level. But that is what he has to learn. He has to stabilize. So maybe initially it may turn out to be some kind of flip-flop kind of affair. That means you do have energy and you do happen to spend it. But then you slowly learn to stay with that energy without trying to dissipate it, without trying to get occupied with another activity. And as you get stabilized, then the capacity of the body also then develops further. At the physical level, it does take time for the body to adjust with the higher energy levels. And one has to be careful not to overdo it. Because if the body is stretched to its limit, then it can create more damage than benefit. So one has to be very careful about that. So if you see any physical symptoms you should immediately stop, not pursue it further. Just drop the whole thing for the time being and come back to it again later on.
Sir, two questions, sir.
Yeah.
First one regarding the study of the teachings. So,
Yeah.
since this is the last session of the series, and in each series, you've kindly taken up different themes and words and really opened up new dimensions of inquiry, because what we thought it was and what it turned out to be are totally different. So we have the experience of having attended these workshops. So with this understanding, if you could give some guidance on how we proceed further in our study of the teachings or our study of whatever Krishnaji is saying. There is, of course, all the study material that is there with every workshop. So maybe, I don't know, we could again revisit that study material. So that's the first question. The second question is, you have progressively covered all the themes which has ended with meditation and religious life, starting with awareness and then other. Is there anything more that Krishnaji has spoken other than this?
Yes, he has spoken about the sacred and so on. We haven't explored that area sufficiently because we didn't find ourselves still eligible to explore that region which Krishnaji calls as sacred. And then there are also some other aspects of Krishnaji's life which sound very mysterious, which we are unable to understand, particularly when he talks about the other. Then what is that otherness and how it is related? Then his dialogue with death and so on. So I think what I'm trying to consider is another workshop, probably in the month of May, around the weekend, which is closer to 11th and 12th May. So I think it is 8th or 9th May or around that time. So we can give the title of Life and Death of Krishnamurti for that workshop. And there maybe we can explore Krishnaji's life in terms of the unfoldment of his teaching. So it is not just the teaching, but also exploring Krishnaji's life as a teacher, as a person, and how the teaching unfolded in his life, and how the different kinds of things emerged at different periods of time and so on. So I think it's going to be quite an interesting journey, and where we will be also able to speak something about the other, and also the thing called the process, and so on. So we are planning a single workshop of that kind in English in the month of May. So probably I'll send the circular around in next couple of weeks. And that will be a first workshop of its kind. We haven't held any such workshop. Most of our workshops were mostly confined to the study of his teachings. But we haven't looked at Krishnaji's life in terms of the unfoldment of his teachings. So probably that we'll be attempting for the first time, that workshop. So I think that is where probably we may touch upon some of the areas which probably we haven't been able to talk about during this series of workshops. Now the other point is, we have attended this whole series of workshops. We have explored most of the aspects of Krishnaji's teaching, which he had talked about. we have tried to go as deeply as possible. And we have also tried to have some kind of holistic vision of his teaching. That means we were not trying to understand his teaching in parts and fragments, but we were trying to have the sense of the whole of his teaching. And so that from that holistic sense, we can work on the particulars. And then particulars can be taken care of. So then that also helped in establishing some kind of relationship between us, because we as a group, we moved together in the exploration of that teaching. Therefore, that has created a certain kind of link, a certain kind of relationship among us. And therefore, we are able to freely discuss and exchange our understanding without the fear of misunderstanding. So when we do express ourselves, we are a little bit confident that the other person, the listener, will not misunderstand us, because we have together explored this teaching. So I hope this kind of exploration will continue in the future series of workshops also. But then what does one do at the end of this series? Right? So one is back to the same position as one was before entering into this exploration, or whether there has been a shift, and then from that shifted position, how does one go about it? So I think we have talked more or less about it, and we have a criterion now as to how to go about various things in our day-to-day life. So one criterion we have said is the criterion of energy. The other criterion that we have said is the laws of nature. And the third factor that we have talked about is the action based on understanding. So all these three together, I think they are enough for anybody to find out what exactly he is supposed to do in any given situation in life. So I think one has to pursue that work further in one's day-to-day life, and not just forget that, well, the workshops are over, so now one can just relax and have a nice time, then just do things which one was not able to do, and so on. So that will be again a scattering of energy. So Krishnaji does say that one should not regiment oneself, and yet he also talks about keeping the things on leash. So sometimes you have to give a total freedom to yourself without any restriction, and yet you have to also hold a leash so that the things don't get scattered. Whatever energy that we have been gathering through all these dialogues and inquiries, I mean, it will be foolish to let it get scattered and again come back as nothing. So, and yet we don't want to regimentize ourselves. So there has to be freedom, and there has to be also a leash. And therefore, we did talk about it somewhat when we had workshop on meditation. We said that give a complete freedom to your thought. Just let it run riot. And then again come back to it. So without losing attention, to let the thought have complete freedom. So that attention is like a leash, and yet the thought feels completely free to be what it is. So maybe sometimes it is possible. So I think one has to be observant, and through that observation, when you comprehend the situation, you will also know what exactly you are supposed to do in that situation, and then take the appropriate steps. And in case of any further clarification or any further discussion, I mean, you can always call me. You can discuss the matter telephonically also. So I think that is what it is. So it's not, although it's the end of the series of workshops, but there will be always the next series. They say the life moves in cycles. So once one cycle is completed, then the next cycle begins. And then there is no end to how many cycles. The life keeps on moving in that way. And so our inquiry also will keep on moving in the same way. So there is no end to it. It's only how far we are willing to go with it. That will be the only thing which will decide whether we will continue with this inquiry or whether we will just drop it.
Namaste, Kishorji.
Yeah.
Sir, Krishnaji used to say, very few people used to say these things. You are one of them, sir, to all of us. Thank you very much, sir. Nothing.
Yeah, you see, my focus was mostly on the teachings.
Yeah.
And so it was not just a cosmetic kind of interest where you just try to understand this, that, and make some clever statements. But I was really interested in going into the depth and the actual understanding and how it is about life and so on. So that has been my interest, and all these workshops have been a great help to me in my exploration and understanding of the teachings. So it's not that I am conducting these workshops, but I am also one of the participants of these workshops, and I am also learning about myself. I'm also exploring the teachings in the same way as all of us are doing. And so it is a learning for me also. And that is why I have been able to sustain this activity of workshops. Because now it's almost 21 years we have been continuously holding these workshops without any break and exploring the teachings. Now, a superficial interest wouldn't have been able to do that. And if I had found out at any point that this kind of study is futile, nothing can come out of it, then I would have stopped long ago. But it's not so. I mean, the more you explore, the deeper the understanding, and therefore the more the appreciation of what that man has talked about. And so that sustains this study. So I'm sure it will continue in future, so far more time to come. And whoever is willing to participate and share in this study is always welcome.
Thank you, Kishorji. Thank you very much. Thanks.
Thank you very much, sir.
Great thing.
Thank you very much, sir.
So we end this meeting on this note that
एक लास्ट क्वेश्चन नाही म्हणणार सर त्याला. हॅलो.
या.
एक लास्ट मला म्हणजे एक क्युरियोसिटी होती की हे एवढं चांगलं नॉलेज आहे ट्रूथचं, हे जास्तीत जास्त लोकांपर्यंत पोहोचावं म्हणून आपल्याला वापरता येईल ते.
No, I think there is no need to do that. I think the right way of conveying this to other people is by living the teachings. So if we live our life based on our understanding of the teaching, then that itself will speak. So we don't have to do anything else to take this teaching to others. But by living our life based on the understanding of the teaching, itself will communicate it to others. So then you don't have to do anything about it. So even Krishnaji, when he was asked, sir, how to spread your teachings? So he said, sir, never try to spread the teaching. You can't do it. You live the teachings. And then he said that the teachings will take care of themselves. You don't worry about the teaching, what will happen to it, whether it will sustain or whether it will just disappear and so on. He said, you don't have to worry about it. The teachings will take care of themselves, but you take care of yourself. So if we try to live the teachings, then that is what is the right kind of action on our part. And through our life, the teaching will get conveyed to others. And then maybe if they do get interested and then they do ask questions, then that is your opportunity to explain to them what you have understood. But trying to deliberately convey something and all those things, so may come to nothing. Maybe a lot of waste of energy. But when you are actually living the teaching, then the people may ask you about it, they may inquire, and then that will be a serious kind of inquiry. But if a person is not living the teaching, then well, why should anybody come to him and ask him about these things? So it's not a matter of academic interest. It is an actual life to be lived. And if you take it in that sense, then only it becomes meaningful. Otherwise, if it is only an academic interest, I don't think anybody would be interested in learning about it. But they may say that there are so many other academic things. So why should we learn only this thing? But if they find that, yes, this is something which is very much relevant to their life, which is very useful to live a meaningful life, then probably they may be interested in it. And then they will come and ask about it. But that is possible only when your life reflects that teaching. So we stop here. Hopefully we'll meet again.
Thank
Thanks,
you, sir.
Krishnamurti.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you all.
So I'm ending the meeting.